So this is video number 2, and we're talking about form this morning. So we're going to be looking at a whole range of different ideas to do with form. And we started in the last video to think about Gertrude Stein's kind of crazy poem, A Carafe That Is a Blind Glass from Tender Buttons, which I just like because it's just crazy. It's how I imagine every poem looks like to every year at 10 and year 11 when you open your unseen poetry. That's what poems look like to you and how meaningless they can be. So we had this thing that was kind of like text, a carafe that is a blind glass, a kind in glass and a cousin, a spectacle and nothing strange, a single hurt colour and an arrangement in a system to pointing. All this and not unordinary, not unordered, in not resembling, the difference is spreading. So that was prose. We decided I decided it didn't have any features of poetry, but I can quite easily make it have features of poetry, which is why I think she calls it a poem, prose poetry. So for instance, I'm pretty sure, and you can have a go at this yourself and decide where you put the line breaks, but I've done this a number of times with my students. We always put them in the kind of the same places. So I'm just going to go a kind in glass and a cousin. That feels like a good place to put a line break. So if my year 7 brought me this and it didn't have lines in it, and I said, little Johnny, please go back to your desk and put some line breaks in it for me, I think the first place you would put one would be there. So a kind in glass and cousin, a spectacle and nothing strange. Well, that feels like a good place for a line break. And look at that, it looks like the same kind of length. A single hurt colour and an arrangement in a system to pointing. Okay, well, I'm going to break there. But then what am I going to do with this line? So I've got choices. I could go a single hurt colour and an arrangement in a system to pointing. I think that looks fine for me. And I think I want that as a verse on its own, kind of a stanza on its own. All this and not unordinary, not in order and not resembling, the difference is spreading. Okay, I've done that before, and I've had it as as like one stanza, like this. But I know I could also have it like this and have each kind of sentence in a stanza of its own, like almost paragraphs almost for each sentence. And what I notice when I do that is that this happens. Can you see how all of these ands, then an start to be at the beginning of the line? Oh, that's interesting. Do you know what I mean about how easy this is now to put into a poem? And then I've got these knots. In fact, then I could maybe split this up differently. And now it's looking even, I don't know, more interesting and more like a poem. And these are all the things to do with form. So every time I'm thinking about what decisions has the writer made about what words they put on what line and why, they're the things that I would be talking about to do with form. So why these words on this line? Why organise it in this kind of a way in terms of the words? Now that's going to help me when I read it stress those words even a little bit more. So when I look at that here, a kind in glass and a cousin, a spectacle and nothing strange, a single hurt colour and an arrangement in a system to pointing. All this and not unordinary, not unordered in not resembling, the difference is spreading. Oh, it makes it so much easier to read. That's fantastic. It makes it more poetry rather than poetic, if you like. So those choices that a writer can make could be very different, and especially in modern poetry where they're less governed by rules of rhythm and rhyme, we'll find them using things like enjambment and caesura. So enjambment can be, we've got two different forms that we'll be talking about when we talk about form. We've got almost natural enjambment, which is what I've just done, where the line, it doesn't finish, there's no punctuation after all this and, there's not a comma or a full stop. I could maybe put that on the next line, I think. Let's have it like that instead. Maybe that would be a kind of a comma, that would be fine. And I could break that like that. You see, these are all choices about form, and there's no right way and no wrong way. It's how the poet has chosen to do it, especially in modern poetry. That's the interesting bit of it. We don't normally think about why this in this way. But enjambment helps create that kind of natural enjambment, natural rhythm that made it easy for me to read aloud. Not that the prose was difficult to read aloud, but that you'll see something in a second that shows you how writers can make it very hard to read their poem aloud. And enjambment is how we do that. So it could be natural, or it could be unnatural and discordant. So this is where instead of breaking it in natural places, I'm breaking it in unnatural places. So for instance, I'm splitting up adjectives and adverbs. Adjectives and verbs. I'm splitting adjectives and nouns. Let's try again. I could be splitting up a pronoun like the from the noun that it goes with. So for instance, the branch, I could split up into the on one line and branch on another. So wherever I'm doing those unnatural and discordant things, I'm breaking up words that would naturally go together onto one line. That's where I'm creating a discordant and unnatural, difficult rhythm that's quite interesting as well. And then we've got caesura, which are those the strong punctuation. So I mean basically other things than a comma. There's no given as to what that might be. In fact, I might even put a dash in there. But it's something in the middle of a line that makes a stop in the middle of the line, which is an unnatural thing to do. So just to show you how that might look with this poem, A Craft That Is a Blind Glass. So what I've done is I've just set it out in a discordant kind of a way, splitting up pronouns from the nouns that they go with, or splitting up things in an unusual way, using some caesura in there, and you'll see it's different. I might read it according to the punctuation, but when a poet, they're using the space that comes after, they're using the lines to make you pause, and that's important. I need to bear that in mind when I'm thinking about a poem. So here's an example where I've split up the lines differently and it just becomes discordant and difficult to read. So a craft, that's a blind glass. A kinding glass and a cousin. Oh, you see how I read that? I just can't help myself. A kinding glass and a cousin. A spectacle and nothing strange. I can't help myself read as how it's supposed to be. A single hurt colour and an arrangement in a system to pointing. All this and not ordinary, not unordered, in not resembling. The difference is spreading, and it just becomes that much more difficult to read. So when I'm thinking about form, particularly in modern poem that's not rhymed and doesn't follow, a syllabic pattern, I'm really thinking, why did you split these words and put these words in this kind of way? So where you're looking at poems in your anthologies, where you're looking at unseen poems that don't have a rhyme scheme or a clear syllabic pattern, think very much about the choices that the writers made about what words go on what line and why, and whether they're creating a natural rhythm that echoes natural speech, like I did with the first version of A Carafe, and then think about whether that's unnatural or disorganised or disordered or discordant, if they're using enjambment in unusual ways. So that's just something that I'm thinking about. And rhyme and rhythm make it often very much easier to read. William Blake uses that extensively in Tiger, Tiger, Burning Bright, and you'll find that in lots of your poems in your anthology. But look for those unusual moments when you're looking for form, the things that stand out, the things that are not ordinary. Of course, we've just looked at a complete nonsense poem. We haven't even talked about the meaning of it. And that's important now, is to think, okay, well, what does this poem mean? What's the big idea? So for me, the big idea is something I can say in one word. What's it about in one word? So in a station of the metro, another kind of nonsense one. The apparition of these faces in the crowd, petals on a wet black bough. And often for me, the big idea might be a word in a poem. So I've got that word apparition. It seems almost like, what's it doing there? Because he could have just said these faces in the crowd, petals on a wet black bough. But it's that apparition. It's the way the faces appear. So maybe it's about appearances. Maybe that's my big word. And then we've got that in a station of a metro. So it's about how the faces look. It's about resembling, about picking up on the Gertrude Stein thing. I think for me, I'm going to go with appearances. It's about appearances. Um, or perhaps a memory, maybe. I don't know. So memories, appearances, a fleeting thought, maybe. I'm not sure. Um, this poem is also very interesting because Ezra Pound, he was part of the Imagist tradition, much like Gertrude Stein, and their famous thing was a rose is a rose is a rose, which is contrary to every English teacher that has ever been born, who want, to think of blue curtains symbolising depression and everything must symbolise something else. And he challenged us to say a rose isn't a symbol of love, it's not a symbol of anything, it's just a rose. Just appreciate it for being a rose. And so in a station of the metro, he's challenging us. He's saying, don't think of these faces as anything else other than faces. And then what happens is he goes, petals on a wet black bough. And you're left there going, is that a metaphor? Is that what the faces look like? Little pink things on a black background, the kind of the shape of them, or something else. And then I'm kind of thinking, oh, it's cherry blossom season at the moment. Cherry blossom in Eastern traditions is very symbolic of life and rebirth and spring and all of those things. But also for the samurai, the moment a cherry blossom is at its most perfect is when the blossom is about to fall or be gusted by the wind. So it's about the fragility of life. You see what I'm saying? I can't think of blossom and not start thinking of all of these symbolic meanings of it because I'm an English teacher and that's what we do. And so this poem, In a Station of the Metro, I'm kind of thinking, I don't know, for me it's almost a challenge. It's about appearances and so on. So then I have to think about, okay, well, let's have a look at what the form is. And then in order to write about it, because I can't write about the things that I'm going to just tell you in a second, I need to pick out which are the important things that support that idea of appearances or, life or a fleeting memory or whatever it is I've decided is the big idea. So the first thing we do is we notice what's there and then we think about how it supports a big idea. So I've taken the apparition of these faces in the crowd a little bit out. And what I've got, these are the 18 things that I decided I could see in terms of form. So it is a couplet, it's 2 lines. 2 lines, that's a couplet. What did we use couplets for? That starts me thinking, okay, that's interesting. So Shakespeare quite often used them to end a scene or to make a dramatic statement. Couplet could be something, the idea of couples and connections and twos and so on. This is something maybe perhaps there. We've got the two lines, but they're uneven. So I have seen people say that these are almost like a train track. No, because train tracks have even amounts of lines. So if they were even, that would be fine. I can, that would be thinking that the big idea of the poem is the station. And whether that's represented in the lines. Now we'll talk about concrete poems in the next video when we're talking about different forms of poems. But the lines are uneven, and the big idea of this poem is not about the station, it's about the appearance of the faces on in the crowd on the platform, not about that. So I don't think the platform or the station is the important thing, and that's why I don't think we can say the 2 lines representative train tracks or anything like that on the platform. So I did notice one line was longer than the other, and then thinking, why did you do that, Ezra Pound? Why did you do that, you baffling man? The second line is shorter again. Is it not finished? Didn't even finish with a full stop. Or is that just my version of it? So then I'm having to go back and check my other versions of the poem. There is a title. That's important because some poems don't have them. The title tells us where it takes place. That's a little bit to do. Title is one of those crossover things, goes into structure too. I noticed that the first line had 12 syllables, the second had 7, and I was starting thinking, okay, haiku, they have syllables. Now, haiku for me, Ezra Pound, he was one of the first people to start translating Japanese haiku into French and English. It's not unimportant that Ezra Pound was interested in haiku. And I think there's something in the idea of a snapshot. Then I start to think, oh, do you know what? This is what this is. It's like a snapshot in his mind, perhaps. I thought there was something rhythmic about crowd and bow. They both had an entire phrase, didn't have verbs. All of these things could be quite important in terms of form. And then out of these 18 things that I can see to do with the form, I then have to decide, okay, well, which support the big idea and which can I then go on and write a paragraph about in terms of, okay, what's Ezra Pound doing here? And that's what we're going to look at not the next video, but the video after that. So the next video we'll look at specific aspects of forms, types of form that you'll come across, and some very kind of quick information on that.